scientists and the doctors to tell them what's going on, but unfortunately they don't always do that. They only do it for the specific times. Anyway, I also think, just to add one bit, we don't have much time, so maybe you can give me your answer later, all right? So I also think just because of this proliferation of social media and everybody has the ability to say something, so anyone thinks what they know is right, so they can say it. So maybe more and more, because of information overload, we get so much information on a daily basis every single minute. So we want something that's more credible. All right. All right. I guess we answered the part about why even do research, right? So we need more, as one of the participants said, we need more evidence-based research. So what happens after you do research? You do not win an award, no. That rarely happens, and nobody gives you anything, nobody claps for you. So what really happens after you do your research and you are done? Yes?
We publish our results.
Yes, you publish the results, of course, so that's what we call publication, right? But conceptually, what happens when you do research and you are finished with the paper and you published it?
You publish in certified journal or...
Yes. What happens after that? Again, conceptually, not every single...
We open questions for another research.
Yes, you open questions for another research paper. So it's an ongoing process. Someone there in the back, yes, I'll only take one.
You can make a strategy for your work or for organization or for media, based on the research, the result of the research.
All right, excellent. You're making my talk today much easier. So we're already connecting the dots about the things I'm going to say. So we do research, yes.
Understanding and developing self-awareness.
Understanding?
And developing self-awareness.
Developing self-awareness. Okay, all right. Thank you. So we do research basically to find out something, correct? That's what the word research means. It's to find out something. It's an attempt to discover something. So why do we need that attempt to discover something? Because our goal, our main goal in doing research is, there's only one word. Yes? One word. No, one word. It's a verb. We do research to... The final purpose of research is what? Yes, it's advancing knowledge. Okay? We do research to advance knowledge. We're used to research with things that we work every day, especially with medicine. Nobody's going to go get a pill from a doctor without knowing that it has been through that process. But we don't really apply this in all kinds of research. I still get people who don't know what media research is. If I tell them I'm a professor or I'm a scientist, they don't understand. If I tell them I'm in media, what do you actually do? So you can research anything you want. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. We're going to talk a bit about the link between research and theory. And theory is a word that most scholars love, but we also know that it's usually misused, or students especially, or people every day use it in a very negative way. Do you know what I'm talking about? How is theory used in a negative way on a day-to-day basis? So if it's theoretical, then it's not what? It's not practical, right? So anytime you say something is theoretical, people are like, oh, it's just too up there, we don't want to do it, right? Especially for students, because we need to teach students skills. For them, something that's theoretical is not practical. And the Arabic word, I feel it's even more powerful. It's nazari, right? So when you say something is nazari, it means someone am binazzir. It means someone is just kind of throwing things around. So I feel the word has a negative vibe. So I usually try, when I'm talking about this to people, tell them that the word theory is not a negative one, and it's not the opposite of practical. In fact, it's the base of what we do as practice. Most people at the undergrad level, at the undergraduate level, learn how to do things. And then when you get to your master's level, you learn why you do those things, correct? And that why is connected to theory. Most of the time, we don't talk much about theory, but theory is the building block of science. This is a book I first read when I was a student, as a PhD student, in my theory class, media theory class. And it's a very long book. It gives you very, specific details about how to build social science theories, but you can skip most of it. If you get the gist of what the entire book is saying, it tells you for theory, first of all, almost always, most of everything in the world is theory and is not a law, because for it to be a law, it needs to be true all the time, correct? That's why we don't prove anything in theories. We try to support it by evidence. So even the word prove is the incorrect term to use when you're talking about research and theory, because that is not what theories do. When we test our theories, we try to find support, find evidence for the theory, and not try to prove it. Proving it means it's always true every single time. So if it's not true every single time, this is our goal, correct? We are trying to keep examining a theory, keep testing it, keep working on it, to get more towards having a more general answer that is almost true, almost all the time, all right? If a theory doesn't get tested enough, we won't have enough evidence to know it works. I'm gonna get to the next part, but first, so first let me tell you what this book tells us. It tells us how to build it, and two main points they focus on. Of course, these three scholars are superstars in the field. The three main points they focus on all revolve around the idea of replication and repetition and consistency and doing things over and over and over again, but in different contexts. So the context part is really what I'm basing most of what I'm going to talk about today. So just to give a brief overview about how at least I see theory. Research works with patterns. Any type of researcher is trained to find patterns. Sometimes it gets too bad when you see it every time you do anything, anywhere you go, anywhere you look, you're always seeing patterns. So regardless of the type of researcher you are, if you're more interpretivism or positivism or critical discourse, you are trained to find patterns in anything that you see, which means your research is based on patterns that you see with data. All right? Patterns are the ones that we'll look for. Of course, depending on the type of research you do, you are taking a different approach to finding these patterns. So one of the things we do is to find consistency. And consistency is what we call reliability in research. Reliability is something that is done in a consistent manner, and it keeps happening, so we are sure, to a certain extent, of course, within the confines of science, that this consistency is happening and without much change. So at least the change doesn't come from us as researchers. So we try to find that consistency. One of the ways to get that consistency is through standardization. What is standardization? We all know what surveys are, regardless of whether you do research or not. So a survey is a quantitative research tool that uses a standardized questionnaire. So standardization means using the same type of instrument to gather your data. Okay? But it doesn't always mean that. It also means you trying to find more of a base for you to always build your research on, as yourself as a researcher, but also across the topics and the issues. Now you're going to know why this is so important. Other than the fact that it leads to theory building, this is also what they talk about the book that I just showed you, with Shoemaker Eyal. Standardization is what builds theory. Because if you don't keep doing the same type of work, changing a bit here and there, changing the sample, changing some of the questions that you ask, changing the topic, changing the context, you wouldn't know if your theory works or not. Correct? Nobody's going to accept information from someone and call it science or theory if, let's say, if it takes me as a person, let's say 20 minutes to get from my home to the university. I can't sell that as a fact. I cannot tell people this is the absolute truth. Nobody will buy it because they're like, well, that's just you, correct? So we have to keep doing the same thing with, of course, with a lot of control to be able to get somewhere. So with this, we go to the main, I'm still not in the main, this is the main topic of today, is Arab media research. So recently, maybe 10 years, 20 years, even a bit before that, compared to the hundreds of years that research has been done, there have been complaints about Eurocentric research, which means most scholars that are not part of the American or Western European group of people start to complain about research being mostly Eurocentric. It has a center that it's almost always related to what happens in the West. So this has led to more efforts by non-Western scholars to try to fix this by focusing on something we call de-Westernization. And in the English language, the DE in the beginning of a word means the opposite, all right? So we don't want Westernization, we want de-Westernization. So we want more work from people who are not part of the Western society and Western scholarship. So that is mostly referred to as the Global South, all right? The Global North and the Global South. Now the Global South is a big word. Depending on who you ask, they would tell you what it means. But in general, you can think of it more as kind of if you split the globe into two, it's mostly the lower part, but not necessarily. There could be some countries in the lower part that don't belong to the Global South, and some countries in the north that don't belong to the Global North. It also has to do with developing countries. In the past, we used to call them third world countries, now they're developing countries, also countries whose economies are not so good. But all of these form part of the Global South. In research terms, we generally refer to Global South, or we include Africa in it, we include the Middle East, and we include Latin America. So, but again, it doesn't mean this is the only place where that includes the Global South. So this is the article that I wrote for JMCQ, which is the oldest journal in mass communication, and it has a bit of a heavy name. It's reconceptualizing Arab media research. So anyway, there are some things in it, and I go through the reasons why I think Arab media research is not so prominent. And then I propose a solution, okay? So this is what we're going to talk about today. Just to base my essay, this publication is not research, it's an essay. It's an academic scholarly essay. But I still wanted to base it on some information, on some facts. These are in no way representative, all right? I just wanted to see what's out there just very briefly and very quickly. So I wrote this at the very end of 2019, beginning of 2020. So I only took the last 2 years. I said, let's just see. If more and more research is being done in the Arab region, it's going to be in these 2 years and not much before that, okay? So I picked 45 Q1 journals. Q1 journals are in the top journals, in the top 25% of the journals on one of the known indexing engines. So in these 45 journals, there were about 2,800 research papers. How many of them were about Arab media? About 1.5% only. Methodologies, most of them were qualitative, 11 quantitative, and 4 were mixed. Affiliations, there were 81 authors on these 41 studies. 34 of them were based in a university in an Arab country. So it could be an American university as well, like LAU, all right? So these are not necessarily Arab universities. But I was looking at the region. Authorship, only 13 out of the 41 had all their authors were Arabs, the rest were mixed. Their origins were only 36 out of these were Arab authors, and only 17 single author papers, and only 7 of them are Arabs, all right? So again, this is not representative in any way. If we dig more, we include more journals, we're gonna find more. I just wanted to see what's going on in the field. And needless to say, this is pretty sad, correct? It's not what we think is going on. So of course, I'm not gonna go through, I don't know how many pages the paper is, like 20 pages. I'm not gonna go through all of what is in there. Just briefly tell you, why do you think where the problem lies? So why does Arab media research lag in the international circles? First of all, we have to think of the historical roots of the region, the culture of the region. Most of the countries, yes, half of the countries probably in the Arab region are very old ones, but also probably half of them are young ones. And the ones that are young countries also have the money and the means to advance it. So you can see most of the older countries don't have enough money or enough, we'll talk about the lack of problems, we don't have that to advance it. So the ones that do are the ones that are young, which means you have to give them more time to do more of this. You can't compare a university that has been, that started 10 years ago to one that has started, for example, 100 or 150 years ago. So that's the idea of giving them more time. We also have contemporary history, and the reason I made the distinction between both, because contemporary history, what I mean by it is conflict in the region. Again, not half, but a big number of the countries in the Middle East have been undergoing conflict. And if you want to know why I put the word genetics, because molecular biology and genetics show us that trauma genes can be inherited. So if some people at least in the regions that have been undergoing conflict for a while, for example, Lebanon, as far as I remember, I was born during the war, of course, Palestine, and more recently, Syria and Yemen and some other countries. But you think when you're born during the war, you live like that, it's normal, it's okay for you, but it's not really okay. Something inside you is off in some ways, and you don't notice until you compare yourself to other people, how you are close. You don't know how to dream big, because your everyday life was related to whether your father's gonna be able to get bread, is he gonna die? And, in the past, usually the fathers, these are my memories of the war, that's why I'm being very distinct about the times when we lived in shelters. My dad would go to get bread, and we don't know if he would ever return, for instance. So these are, other than the fact that I experienced them themselves, these are inherited. You can get trauma genes and PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, from the past also. So don't underestimate the ability of people to kind of put maybe less important things, luxury, as the media research is a luxury at this point, put it aside and focus more on being able to survive on a daily basis. And again, unfortunately, in Lebanon, this has been the case for the past 2-3 years because of all these issues that we've been having. It's really difficult to focus on what you would really like to do and what is the best you can ever be, because you're really busy not being depressed, maybe, right? And again, a lot of more countries, the last 10 years since the Arab uprisings, have been undergoing this. And then we have to think of what higher learning looks like in the Arab region and what the education environment is. We can't not look at the idea or the fact that STEM is more important. The sciences are given more value. There are also some evidence to that. If you look into the Arab region, Forbes listed, I can't remember which university in the Arab region in the Gulf, one of the Gulf states, as the most advanced. And if you look at the Forbes top list of universities in the region, almost all of them have to do with sciences. So the media field, sociology, all of these are put aside. And I say sociology because this is not the only region that experiences this. The exact same thing happened in Europe, where all of the, the minds were born, all of this, the same exact thing happened. Because they were focused on Darwin and natural kind of selection, they were more interested in the psychology, so it was more about sciences and the natural sciences and physics. That's when sociology had to struggle and fight. This was towards the end of the 19th century, to fight just to gain some legitimacy. So imagine if sociology, such a big field, had to fight to gain some legitimacy and prove itself as a field worthy of being called a discipline and worthy of research. So imagine how the media field is, which is much smaller than sociology. So again, this is not something that is unique to the region. It is something, it looks like world regions have to pass through until they gain that legitimacy. And then we have the idea of who graduated from what university and what type of access do you have to research or knowledge. So the cross-pollination that I talk about here refers to mostly to people, to Arab or Arab origin scholars who got educated in some type of a Western university, so they have a link with those universities, and of course they can speak Western language. Most often this is the English and not French. So these are the people who have the ability to go back and forth. Some of us who are like that know exactly what I'm talking about. We go to conferences every year, we meet these people, and you can see most of the community in 1,000+ researchers at conferences. Very few of them are Arabs, very few. Most of them are Western. So this cross-pollination, the learning that happens when you are exposed to conferences, is not available to everybody. It's a very short group of people who are able to do this because of their training. When let's say you get trained at an American university, in the US, you know what research is, you go to conferences even as a student, you are in that mindset, in that loop. That's what we call the invisible college. It's not a term for Arab media, or it's not a term I created. It's a term in education. It's called the invisible college. This is where it's like a kind of a community of people that know each other and can go back and forth. So don't, again, underestimate the value of this, which means those who don't have access to it have a much harder time being part of research. And of course, language plays a huge role. This is where there's a bit of a struggle. If you want to establish yourself as an international scholar, you're going to mostly have to write in English. Why? Because you can still write in Arabic journals, but if these are not translated, that people in the world are not going to read them. So because English is the language that is the universal language, for you to be part of that, if you want people to read your research, you have to write it in English. The second idea has to do with the indexing. The last few years, there's been this business hype of we have to index, we have to rank journals, for example. We have to give them a rank, and if you are a Q1, if you're in the top 2, you get an award from your university, if you're in the this or that. So there's a lot of push towards the business side of this. And let me tell you, I was at a conference, a session that had the editors of the top 3 journals in the field. One of them was JMCQ, and then the other one is Journal of Communication, and one of them was about communication research. All of them were complaining about this because they said it's starting to be more like an industry. They have to sell, publishers need to sell, so if you are publishing in a journal that's highly indexed or ranked, then it means you have an extra badge. And universities also follow that trend because this is the trend that raises their rankings in the world rankings of universities as well. So do you see how there's this kind of unending cycle where if you are lost in one part of it, or if you don't keep running, it's like people keep running in these circles, you don't know where to start and where to end. If you're lost, or if you maybe take a breath, just step outside, you probably lost the ability to run with them in this track. So If you publish in Arabic, one of the problems that now is getting solved is that most of the journals are not ranked. Now there's more effort. There has been some effort into trying to rank these journals as well, so you can also get some type of let's say a recognition because you published in a ranked journal. So I'm not going to go through the details of the solution because my talk is really not about the solution, it's about some of the issues. I want to give you examples about these solutions mostly. I advocate for a bit of inclusiveness and balance, and I like to, I advocate for a mix of epistemologies, which means if you want to do standardized research that is quantitative, you have to build theory by doing something over and over again because this is how you stack the data. But I say we also have to add some culture to it. This is the idea of getting more into the qualitative components, so adding a little bit of culture to it, so you have this balance. And then you can have some people who do more of this or more of that. But one of the reasons why we can't push for more theories, we can advance them and we add more from the region is because we don't have enough standardized tools. Most of the, I do go through a small kind of very brief literature review of the scholarly research out there. Most of the research from the Arab world is books. And books take more of a historical recounting of facts, which are amazing. We all need these books, but they don't advance theory. If you don't advance theory, you can't publish in these journals. I'm going to give you some examples about some of the work I have done with my colleagues, and I know some of them are here. So let me give you some examples of what this looks like. I got involved in media systems research. So if you are interested in knowing more about media systems, then you know that some of the first people who have done a tremendous job in this are Hallen and Mancini in their very famous book, Comparing Media Systems, all right? So, of course, this was published later on to be more inclusive. And then the only Arab-related book of some sort that deals with systems, as in groups people in different areas, is from Ryu. So I started teaching the class and using some of these books, and so Ryu is from 2004, and needless to say, a lot has changed in the Arab world since 2004. So most of the book, the information is the book became outdated, and we cannot use it anymore. So a colleague of mine from the Free University of Berlin, Dr. Carola Richter, we were talking and complaining because she had the same problem teaching the course in Berlin. And we started to talk about, okay, how about we come up, we create a book. And that's how it started. And then we created this book. We wanted the book to be the idea of balance and inclusiveness and standardization. What we did is we took what Hallen and Mancini did and we tried to adapt it to the region. This is how we try to push for theory. We use something and push it forward. So that meant a lot of work, a lot of talks between our colleagues. So this is one of the ways to do it. The other way is we try to include Arab scholars to the best of our abilities, and the majority of the scholars, of the chapter authors in this edited book are from the Arab region. The few who are not are experts in that region that they belong to. The other good thing about this book is why I like it, other than it took 2 years of my life, is that it's open access, so it's free to download. Which meant the university is not going to give me any points. Any points. 2 years of my life I spent, of course, doing other work as well. 2 years of my life I spent. I could have published probably 3 or 4 research papers, and I could have, my H index would have jumped high, but it didn't happen. So this is not considered as part of the points you get for research because it's not in a publisher that is ranked. But I'm still proud of it because it's open access. It means you don't have to pay for it. And then the better news, happened when we also got a really good deal with one of the best, if not the best, publishing house in the region to publish it, to translate it to Arabic. So now we can be sure that most of the people will be able to use this. This is the most updated book, and it looks at each chapter by itself, and it's standardized in a manner that in our intro we talk about what the book looks like, and then each chapter, all of the authors were part of it. So I do have to do a shout out for my very dear friend, Dr. Sahar Khalifa. She wrote the Iraq chapter, and also Dr. Gretchen King, who wrote the Palestine chapter. So it was a really good effort from all the scholars. So that's why I would say this is probably one of my proudest moments, because this is a place where I felt I've done something. I mean, research articles are just research articles, but this is a place where you think you do a bit of work. The other part, the other types of examples I'm going to give you are about research on protest that Dr. Jad Milki and I have been doing. And he's going to see his name a lot today, but we really just do, I don't know how many, 10 authors together? We lost count how many papers we published together. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to talk about the part that is related to my JMCQ article about how to advance research in the field. So, you know, in 2019, there were a wave of protest in the world, and we thought, when I remember exactly where I was sitting when Jad called me and he said, how about we do a survey? I was like, I'm too traumatized. We call it revolution, but it wasn't. You know, there's Saura, there's a revolution out there. I don't know if I'm gonna teach tomorrow. If not, all of these were there, but it was like, let's do it. And in typical Jad manner, he pushed me a lot, and we're like, okay, let's do it. So it started in the middle of people being depressed, people not knowing what's gonna happen to the country. We were doing research. So we created this survey, and we got a huge grant to cover it, so it was a representative survey. And then we also thought, wait a minute, there are so many protests around the world, and we know people in these countries. Let's target them. So we also talked to Dr. Sahar, and she was in charge of the Iraq protests, and we also had a colleague in Iran, in Hong Kong, and in Chile. We also had people in France, but at the time there was the Gilets jaunes, if you remember. I mean, they were not exactly like these, but they were similar. They started the work, but it was a bit difficult for them because they didn't have enough funding, and you know, France is a bit big, so they weren't able to go around and do it without funding, so they pulled out of the protest. So what does this mean? One of the ways we do this standardization to advance knowledge is using theories that are established theories. Established doesn't mean they're proven always true, but they're theories that people keep using, and they have been shown to be pretty, you know, robust in all different situations. One of them is selective exposure, and it's understudied field of selective avoidance. We all know this from the psychology theory of cognitive dissonance, which tells you that as humans, we don't want to feel dissonant on the inside. We don't want to feel, the word is dumb. We don't want to feel dumb about something, so we try to convince ourselves of the opposite. When it comes to media research, this means we align, we watch, and we expose ourselves to the media that align with our beliefs and our values, all right? So for example, if you are pro-party B, you're going to watch the TV station of party B. If you are pro-party A, you're going to watch the TV station of party A. Why? Because if you are pro-party A and you watch the TV of party B, what's going to happen is you're going to get really angry, correct? You're going to get upset, so why go through that? It's just safer to do that. Of course, the theory of cognitive dissonance is much bigger than this, but this is how we translate it to media research. I'm going to walk you through just a couple of specifics about what that means and how it's done, just to see how you can keep the standardization and keep the theories that are established and test them in a new region by fixing a little bit and adding something to it. So we were able to publish 2 papers. The first one is in the International Journal of Press Politics, and the second one is in the International Journal of Communication. The second one is being printed right now, literally being printed right now because it passed all of it. So we have 2 papers in it, and then we also have 2 papers. One of them is already finished. We're publishing it. The other one will be finished in about 2 weeks with the international team. All right. So this one is only about the Lebanese protest. You don't need to focus on this. Just to tell you what are some of the things that we wanted to do. We wanted to see if your attitude toward the protest will predict some things. Some of the things are, one example, if you would engage in selective exposure. The other thing is if you would engage in actual political behavior, which is participation in street protests, okay? We also had lots of different measures, so one paper was not enough, we had 2 for this. And then there's the idea of issue publics. This is an idea, a very small area in research that very few people have used for some reason. And we were drawn to it because we thought we have something to do here. So Converse in the 1960s came up with the idea of issue publics that tells you that you can create issue from not the Arabic word like a problem. Not like that. I know what issue is in a political sense. Do you understand what I mean by issue? For example, employment or unemployment is an issue. Economic collapse is a Qadiyya? Okay, yes, Qadiyya, exactly. So not issue as a problem. So these are the issues, in the States, most people most of the politicians have issues that they are strong with, they always push for, and some they don't really focus on. So we thought we have really something really big here. If we add some of the measures that we have to create issue publics, and we did, which means we are the first people, actually the second only, to do this in the history of research scholarship, but the first to do it in a protest context. Do you see how you advance something? So it doesn't matter if nobody has done it before or 1 or 2 people have done it. The whole idea of issue publics has not been studied so much. It has been done once, and not too long ago, but I think the authors are Peralta Eyal. So we added to this. So now the idea of issue publics, it has another 1 or 2 citations. People are interested in it. They can work more with it. And one of those comes from a region that is the Arab world. And then we also wanted to see how sharing happens on social media. The other part has to do with social media use, also selective avoidance. How many of you, in any type of conflict that you've lived in your life, regardless of whether it's in your country or not, have on social media hid someone, unfriended someone, deleted someone as a friend because of something they said? You are like, I just cannot take this anymore. Yeah, I think more of us did. If we don't unfriend them because they might know, we tend to hide them, right? You see too much of them. This is human nature. So we also wanted to ask about that. And the 2 other studies that have done this, one of them had to do with Israel and Palestine. It was from an Israel side. They were looking at how phonetic people would actually unfriend someone and avoid people on social media. There was one of the issues with Palestine. And then the other one, it was in Hong Kong, but not in this one, from the 2014 Umbrella Movement. And we are the 3rd. So we use this idea of selective avoidance, which put us in some trouble with the reviewers because I think most of them didn't know it existed. They didn't know selective avoidance existed, but we really like it because it happens, especially on social media, because in the past, if you avoid people by not calling them or not answering the phone, but on social media, they're literally there screaming at you. It's like people knocking at your door every single day, and you have to make a choice of either changing your house or blocking them or doing something like that. For example here, we have to always ask about demographics and psychographics, but for us, psychographics meant something a bit different, and also part of demographics. Some of at least Iraq and Lebanon are sectarian, all right? Ta'ifi. So the normal normal, conservative, liberal, all of these don't quite work. You have to think about the politics of that particular country, but we also have to make it standardized in a way that works for all. So we didn't ask which party you belong to, we asked them, do you belong to a party or not, or do you support, or to what extent you support or you don't support it. So these are some of the changes that you have to add to your research if you want to make it more culture sensitive, as in it works for your own country and region and you're pushing something forward, at the same time keeping the standard part of the theory itself. And this is the part that really pushes the theory forward. When you add a different context, when you add a different, what we call variables, you add a different question, this is how you can add so much knowledge to, let's say, to the normal questions of are you liberal or conservative, correct? So this is how you can test whether the theory works in different situations. Then attitude strength. Different ways you can test what attitude means. Research in surveys, in conflicts, tested in different ways. We combined a few different research papers, and we measured it through how strongly they feel about the protest, as in how strongly they support or oppose the protest. Okay? I'm not going to go through all of these because, again, each one of them has to do with so many details that we don't need. And then, this is what we found. If you're confused, it's fine, because every time I look at this, I have to also remember what we found, because it's a bit difficult. But we found definitely support for selective exposure and selective avoidance, but we found it with the people who are high in their attitudes. So the pro-protests, the supporters of the protests were more likely to share only information about protests that they support, or support the information that supports the protest. They were also more likely to avoid people, so they were more active, and this says a lot about what civic engagement means. It says a lot about the link between social media behavior and political behavior, which we call online civic engagement and offline civic engagement, right? A lot of people say things on social media because it's free and you can write it and you sound whatever, but how many of those people would actually go and do the thing? How many people would be part of political change and civic engagement, being active citizens? So this is why this area of research is really big in the last at least 10-20 years, because of social media and the idea of, oh, I do a lot of things on social media, I support this and that cause, but then do you do something in real life? No, so it's just talk. So again, these two studies and the other ones, they're studies we worked hard on, just to be able to keep the theory and advance it by adding a context that, yes, nobody has ever done before. And we are, I think, right, Chad? We are the first to do this 5-country selective exposure study during protests. Then we had to ask these questions that have to do with, we know how the West thinks of civic engagement. We know what polarization means. We know what echo chambers mean. We know what filter bubbles mean. We tend to be in specific parts with people we know, and it happens a lot on social media. When people thought the internet would come and it would erase this, most often than not, it did the opposite. People tended to become more polarized. They tended to engage more in selective exposure, choose the media that they want, choose the people that they want. The end is not a lot of political deliberation, because political deliberation requires you to sit with people who have opposing views just to try to find what is going on to go for a solution that works for everybody. When you say, I don't want to talk to you because you're against what I believe, we're going towards more and more polarization. And like I said, unfortunately, so far, evidence from research shows across the world there's a lot more polarization than not. And we with these studies, we're also adding to the idea of political polarization and civic engagement and protest. So we had to ask these questions because, you know, when I first asked you what do you do with research, when you finish your paper, you think about what did I find? You find out that you found very little, and there are more questions that you want to work on to be able to find more and more. That's the cycle, the beautiful cycle, that exhaustive cycle of research. And then I'm going to try to end with, wow, I'm right on time. I'm going to try to end with some other types of research that, that you can do, which is comparative. Comparative research is one of the best ways for you to add an, I don't want to say marginalize, but add a region or a context that has not been studied before. So again, Jad and I, we are part of the JRP, the Journalistic Role Performances Project, in its second wave. The first wave, I don't know when it was, a few years ago. This second wave brings together, it used to be 43 countries, but a few dropped out, 36 countries. We have been working for 3 years on this, and none of the traumatized students that helped us collect the data are here. We had to follow the procedure, so every single country in the project collected data on this specific date at this specific time from these specific media. So it was so standardized that anything that comes out of it, I have to, I've been in so many of these meetings, I have to remember how the data, I think we have 140,000 data, 140,000 data from the study. And we're starting with the journal publications, with the books, so this is one of the ways that, and well, not most of the people, at least some of the leads on it are from the Global South. The lead author is from Chile. But it has an international community. So it looks at all the different areas you can advance something. And of course, it becomes really difficult to do analysis because there's so many different variables to include. And then I've also worked a lot with conflict with my friend and colleague, Claudia Kozman. We did a comparative research on the conflict in Syria with the 3 papers, these are 2 of them, by using framing theory, which is very well known and everybody uses it, and apply it to a context by using the same methodology and the same conceptualization of what framing is, because framing is just about anything you can ever want it to be. Anytime you don't have a theory, you say, I'm just going to call it framing. And unfortunately, people publish like that. But you can't publish in highly ranked journals if you just call it something. It has to follow more of the real theoretical ones. So again, another group of studies that I'm very proud of are these, where we compared US and Lebanese newspapers, and unfortunately we found that regardless of what culture you come from, regardless of what type of media system you have, America and Lebanon have extremely different, very, not polar on the 2 sides, with very different media systems, but still they relied mostly on the same frames. How did they cover the chemical weapons attack in Syria in 2013? How did they cover 5 years of war? They used conflict, and they used diplomacy. Diplomacy as in diplomatic effort, not in a good way, as in, I'm going to fix it, and you're to blame, and you're to blame. So what is not covered in all of these? What frames are not covered? People, human interest, people who have died, people who suffer the most from wars are humans, and humans were not covered. So regardless of what type of media system you come from, you can say, at least in the context of coverage of war and conflict, that the media behave in a similar manner, which is more focused on what we call war journalism as opposed to peace journalism. And then you will try to do something like this. This is my own research. Try to see what have you done and where do they work. And then you can see these are theories. So if you base your research on theories, you have a base at least for how to move forward. And for each of those theories, if you add something, if you add the context, that you can push it forward. By the way, I also do sports research, but I didn't put it in here because it's not relevant. But if I add the third type of bubble about sports research, you're going to see they're mostly the same theories that I'm examining and I'm testing across different contexts. So here you will see some of the studies that I've done with JAD, media dependency, uses and gratifications, and uncertainty reduction. All of these are theories that have been, some of them have been understudied. We applied them to the context of war, and this was, the data came from a survey of Syrian nationals, all right, in 4 different countries, in Syria and 3 countries at the height of the war in 2014. This is not comparative because it only looked at 1 country, but still it uses standard measures of the theories that have been used and apply them to a different context, to a war context that no one has done before, and second one is applying it to a war context in an Arab region that is a bit different than any type of region that would experience conflict. I'm done. All right. So these are, if you want, some of the references that I used, just the ones that I talked about. All right. Thank you so much. So we have questions now. Jad, questions? 15 minutes. Any questions? I can send this to you if you want. There's not much info in it, but I can send it. Yes. I'll send it to Annie. Okay?
Hi, thank you for the presentation and all the information. It was super interesting. I have a question regarding the selective avoidance and selective exposure issue, because I feel like, especially when they're learning about media usage, how do we tackle this issue that people select their favorite news outlets and then they just get a certain kind of news? I mean, of course, there's individual responsibility, but as a media producer, how do I how can I achieve that I'm not polarizing and I'm actually also getting audiences maybe that are not necessarily in complete agreement with me, so I can actually influence them also?
I don't know if there's anything you can do as a media producer, because this has to do with the audience. You cannot change them. The only thing you can do is be more balanced in your own reporting, in your own content, so they don't see it as polarized. That's the only thing you can do, right? So you can do your part, which is be more balanced, but you cannot change people's minds, because that's also, it's really human nature, but we try to highlight it. What you can do, maybe do a show on research on this, and then get people to understand how bad it is for democracy, or for, for a collective involvement in the politics and the policies that affect us as humans, that those people up there do, just for them to understand that this is really part of it and we have a role to play. Again, the only thing you can do is really do your best part, but you cannot control them other than highlight that this is going on, because most people don't do it. And remember when I told you most media in the beginning definitely love science, and they love anything with the virus, with the coronavirus, they used a lot of it because they cannot not talk to experts, but they don't most of the time. All this media research, rarely ever, any scholar, any media scholar is on TV, yeah? Who's on TV always? Or who is cited in papers? They're the politicians or experts, political experts in something. How come they never ever invite anybody who is, and I'm not talking only about the region, that's everywhere in the world. You rarely ever see, you see the pundits, these experts, these people who want to say things, but rarely media scholars. So in media, that's part of media literacy. You have to include more evidence-based information. other than just quotes from here and there. So that's why for our students, for their capstones, regardless of what they do, they must include a research component. It could be a full research paper, their senior study, or it has to have some research component in it. So they can't get away with doing something, whether it's a communication campaign or a journalistic product, without showing the world that we know how to use research. And the more you do this, the better it's going to get for everybody. So when media, when media people hire students who can do this, more and more of these, then you will see a bit of change. But there's still a lot of resistance, even in the students, that they don't want to learn research. Yes?
Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. I have more of an experience, and then I'll end it with a question. So I think one of the reasons that our research in the Arab world is not that prominent or that available is, for example, in my case, I studied at a college. It's the teachers are in college. We study for 5 years, and then by the end of it, you write a research paper and you conduct research. And through the process, there were a lot of difficulties to even get to survey the students, to gather data, and then to analyze it. But then all that there was that my supervisor reviewed it, that she gave me a mark, a grade, and then that's it. There wasn't a chance to peer review it or even hope to publish it or to use the findings somewhere else. So my question is, in this case, how are there opportunities or chances to conduct research that's going to be published from my country? I am in my country, I conduct research, and not necessarily as part of a college or a university, because that is kind of, yeah.
Yes, you can. You can always submit to a journal as an independent researcher. You can. But I'm glad you brought this up because, again, now I'm very serious. The reason why we push for research, and we get a lot of pushback from, we were at another university and research methods were part of the curriculum, and then they removed it instead of adding it. So here half of my classes, I spend them telling the students why research is important. And I have to be creative in finding different ways that they can understand the value of research because they're not used to it. I also think it starts with the schools, where the more, in schools, if you start to introduce them to the idea of research, but they will get more of it. But unfortunately, they become seniors, when they come to my class, and they have not really learned about research. So for them, it's foreign. And of course, it takes a lot of work. But then you also have to know the faculty. That's what also differentiates one university from another. If the faculty in there are research active, as in they engage continuously with research and not just publish one thing and then we're done, all of this pushes for more of a research mindset. So you can see informally in all of the classes, students hear the word research, research, research more. And then, I'll bring up the idea of a capstone. With capstones, these are full research papers that students do, and then they have the ability to publish them. Of course, they need a bit of work after that. So you can. The short answer is you can, yes. Just you can submit to any journal you want. Okay. Any other questions? Yes. And then you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, how much do you think
Can you raise your voice? I can't
sorry,
hear you.
yeah.
Yes.
How much do you think that content moderation, especially on social media, affects the selection bias of the people? Is it actually up to the consumers of the media, or is it more taken over by the networks using algorithmic content moderation and algorithms to kind of send you towards specific pages and within your bubble? How do you think that correlates a lot in social media or not?
What's the word content? What?
Algorithmic content moderation, the algorithms
I can't get that last one.
Moderation.
Algorithmic content, what?
Moderation.
Moderation.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Well, algorithms play a big role now. And I don't know how much how much control media have. That's why if you get, or if you consume international media, you know that about a few weeks ago, a few months ago, every day Facebook and Google were summoned to Congress to testify about something, because and now more and more countries in the world, I know a lot has been happening at the EU level, been trying to moderate, to do something with that, because they, I don't want to say they own the space on social media, digital spaces, but they mostly do because they're so powerful. I mean, the reason why they get called is much bigger than this, but still, they're able to push some out. So sometimes by mistake, if you click on some things, then they're going to keep pushing that for you. So, and more research now includes the idea of gatekeeping, for example. We talk about gatekeeping. In the past, it was Mr. Gates choosing, the media, but now algorithms do that for you. I don't know how much power they have against it because it's much bigger than them. It's the main platforms. They are the ones that regulate or not. And with Elon Musk and Twitter now, there are so many people are saying, oh, what did he do? And then some people said he pushed some people out. So there's always, this is not about the media themselves, it's about the platforms, because the media are just the consumers also of this. But you asked something I was going to comment, maybe that was not your main question, but the media, also the mainstream media, legacy media, are still more powerful than people. People can be powerful in a few different, for example, different issues like the Me Too movement, or let's say the protest, the Black Lives Matter. There are some places where people could do something, but if you look at everything else, most of the issues are dominated by the mainstream media, because again, it's a whole field of research that people tend to focus more on the media and push and retweet and repost and do all of this the legacy media content than content from people, because they still see them, even though trust is low globally in the media, they still see them as more credible than just somebody they don't know. So, yeah. Yes.
يعطيك ألف عافية على المحاضرة. أنا بس كنت بدي أركز على شغلة، حتى بالأبحاث مرات إحنا لازم نلجأ للتربية الإعلامية في اختيار المؤسسة اللي بدنا نختار منها البحث. يعني في مرات مؤسسات بتكون هي يعني مؤسسات ربحية أو غير ربحية لكن مش جامعات، بيكون البحث كمان في تحيز للجهة اللي هي عم تدعمها. يعني أنا قرأت بحث قبل فترة عن الحرب الروسية في أوكرانيا، وهو بحث كامل وكيف عم بشكله بيصوروا المعلومات المضللة بتطلعها الوسائل الإعلامية عن روسيا. بالمقابل في أبحاث كمان مثبتة، ما بحكي بحث مش مقال أو رأي أو خبر، إنه كيف الوسائل الوسائل الأمريكية بتصور كيف الإعلام الروسي بشكل الرأي العام من خلال استطلاعات رأي. يعني جزء من الأبحاث المعلومات المضللة عم بيحكوا بالفترة الأخيرة إن هي جزء عالم المعلومات المضللة، جزء منه كان بيجي من الأبحاث والدراسات. يعني مش دائما لازم أنا أعتمد على الأبحاث والدراسات، بقدر ما بدي أعمل كمان فاكت تشيكينج للمؤسسة والجهة اللي صدرت منها. وإحنا بنشوف إنه كثير انتشرت مؤسسات بحثية وتضاءل دور الجامعات اللي هي دائما اللي بتكون نيوترال، ما في تحيز أو دعم لأي جهة على حساب جهة.
I don't know if I understood your question, but if you're asking about the sampling or just using, or are you just asking about using a publication in your work?
لا أنا ما بحكي
لا بالبحث تبعك أنت ولا؟
لا بالبحث تبعي المصدر، كيف أنه بدي أختار المصدر حتى بالبحث.
Yes. Okay, easy. أسهل شيء, the easiest thing to do is you only use research from journal publications, because the peer review process that journal publications go through are not like any type of center. Very few centers in the world produce the type of research that is not, I don't want to say biased, but that is not maybe hiding something but not the other. The only place that is free of bias would be the journal publications. That's why we only use those. I cannot build my research on, build my own study, even though it's really good. I cannot build it on research done by some institute somewhere. Because you're right, we don't know who funds them. You know, in the past, I don't know how many years ago, decades ago, they found a study that was, I think CNN was reporting on a study, turned out on a study on why water is important to drink, and it was funded by Coca-Cola. You know, Coca-Cola also has water. They don't sell them in the region, but in the States they also have their own water. So you definitely, these are some of the media literacy, yes, components that you have to look for. Again and again, that's why knowing research is important and learning research methods, because as a consumer, if you're reading, you would know they have a duty to include who is sponsoring it and how they sampled. If you understand research, you can evaluate that research and choose to use it or not. We almost always use research that is only from a publication. The only time we use research not from a publication is if it's something that just happened and there are no studies, so we use it as there were 2,000 people protesting in the streets, and then that's it. But never a finding. We're out of time. Thank you so much.